Approximately 26,000 years ago, when the last glacial maximum was at its peak, human history was in a period where staying alive wasn't a one-day challenge but had to be won anew with every passing season. Many parts of the world were much colder than they are today. Glaciers stretched for thousands of kilometers, and in some regions, just by looking at the environment, the first thought would be that human survival there would be impossible. But archaeology and genetics tell a completely different story. During that period, our ancestors not only survived, but were gradually spreading into new territories. This may seem strange at first glance because, in the very climate that severely affected the populations of many species, humans appear to have been strengthening their presence. This contradiction led researchers to the question of what it was that made our ancestors different from other animals. If the answer to this question were simply enduring the cold, the story might not be so interesting. The truth is that the human body was never perfectly designed for the Ice Age. We didn't have thick fur, nor did our bodies have the natural insulation that protects Arctic animals from the cold wind. Biologically speaking, humans weren't among the creatures expected to survive for thousands of years in such harsh weather. The real mystery isn't the cold. It's how a species that, at first glance, seems completely unsuited to the environment became its most successful survivor. And the more researchers studied this question, the more they realized that the answer wasn't hidden in any single major discovery. It was the result of small changes that worked together, gradually giving humans not just the ability to survive, but the advantage to adapt. For this reason, when we talk about ancient winters, the focus shouldn't be solely on snow or temperature. The real story is the knowledge that was passed down from one generation to the next, and the earliest proof of this learning process is found in one thing without which all other survival strategies would be incomplete: fire. Fire is often thought of merely as a source of heat, but during the Ice Age, its true importance was far greater than that. A team from the University of Vienna and the University of Algarve worked at Site Korman, 9 in Ukraine's middle Dniester Valley, and identified 3 hearths that are 26,500 to 19,000 years old. Using micromorphology, colorimetric analysis, and related geoarchaeological methods, they showed that these fires were controlled burns and could reach temperatures of up to 600 degrees Celsius. According to researchers, fire wasn't just for warmth, it was equally essential for cooking, tool-making, and social gatherings. Even after nightfall, work could continue. Tools could be repaired, the next day's hunt could be planned, and most importantly, the knowledge that could only be learned by watching and listening began to be passed from one generation to the next. But fire alone was never a guarantee that a group would survive to see the next winter. If you just sit by the fire and the cold wind outside strips your body of heat the moment you step out, survival isn't possible for long. This way of thinking gradually led humans to understand that it's a better strategy to adapt to the environment rather than fighting against it. Simply hanging hide on the body and shaping it into wearable clothing, there is a huge difference between the two. Research in La Prairie, Wyoming, in 2024 identified 32 bone needle fragments dating to approximately 12,900 BP. ZooMS and micro-CT scanning revealed that these needles were made from bones related to canids, felids, and hares. University of Sydney archaeologist Ian Gilligan, who has conducted extensive research on bone needles and eyed awls, says that making needles from the bones of large animals is quite difficult, which is why small, thin bones were chosen. According to Pelton, these garments were linked to fur-bearing animal textiles and helped provide warmth in a cold climate. This discovery may seem small at first glance, but biologically its impact was enormous. The human body is constantly producing heat, but if that heat keeps escaping, no matter how many calories you consume, survival becomes difficult. Fitted clothing didn't directly solve this problem, but it did reduce heat loss enough that the body didn't have to spend all its energy just staying alive. This change allowed humans to walk farther, hunt, and stay active even in harsh weather. The story of shelters wasn't just about building roofs. Many people think that ancient humans would have gone into caves every winter, but archaeological evidence doesn't support that idea. Caves weren't everywhere, and even where they weren't always occupied by humans. Many groups built their own shelters, some from wood, some from mammoth bones, and covered them with animal hides. It's surprising that they built shelters, and even more surprising that the design of those shelters seems deliberately intended to trap heat inside. Small entrances, a low slung structure, and a fire pit in the center, all of this points to the fact that survival was the result not just of strength, but of observation. The more evidence we found, the clearer it became that our ancestors were not waging war against nature. They understood it. But despite all these changes, one question still remained. When it was nothing but snow outside and hunting wasn't successful every day, where did the energy needed to keep the body alive ultimately come from? Today we often see food merely as a way to satisfy hunger. But in the Ice Age, food was essentially the body's currency. In cold weather, the human body doesn't just use energy to walk or work, it also continuously burns calories to maintain its temperature. If a group had little game for many days, the problem wasn't just hunger. Gradually, the body's heat would begin to drop, which is why in the Ice Age, the biggest challenge was often not the cold itself, but obtaining the energy needed to withstand it. This was why prehistoric hunters didn't go out just in search of meat. They were actually after fat. Fat provides more than twice as much energy per gram as protein or carbohydrates. And in a freezing environment, that difference becomes very important. Archaeologists studying Ice Age camps have found evidence indicating that animal bones were often broken not just to remove the meat, but to extract the marrow inside, the body's most energy-rich part. But hunting is never predictable by nature. It can happen that for days on end you don't see a single large animal, or that the entire group returns empty-handed despite chasing one for hours. If survival depended solely on a hunter's skill, perhaps the human story would end right there. But archaeological evidence reveals a different picture. In Iraq's Shanidar cave, archaeologists discovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal they call Shanidar I. This individual had one arm amputated, one eye was blind, and bore numerous old injuries on his body. Yet this individual lived to be about 50 years old, an advanced age by that era's standards. According to Eric Trinkhaus, cases like Shanidar point to Neanderthal social support and care. Lorna Tilley has developed the framework of bioarchaeology of care, which is used to interpret disabilities and long-term care based on prehistoric finds. Within this approach, Shanidar I and other cases are viewed as having likely received support from their group. At first glance, this point doesn't seem related to winter, but in reality this is where the story changes. Many species survive by their physical strength, whereas humans tied their survival to a social system. Knowledge wasn't confined to a single person's mind. If an elder knew which valley yielded the most game during winter or which wood burned longest, the value of that knowledge was no less than that of any weapon. Each generation not only saved its own life, but also improved the chances of survival for the next generation. The Ice Age story here evolves from a mere survival tale into a narrative of human evolution. The more evidence that accumulated, the clearer it became that our success wasn't the result of any single discovery. The real power lay in using all those discoveries as a system. Fire provided time, clothing conserved heat, shelters reduced the environment's impact, and cooperation tied all of these together. When the Ice Age ended, it wasn't just that humans survived. They were more prepared than ever for the world that awaited them. If we try to understand this whole story in just one sentence, we might say that ancient humans survived the Ice Age because they learned to make fire, weave clothing, and build shelters. This isn't wrong, but it's not the whole story. The real change came in the way humans collected information, remembered it, and then passed it on to the next generation. It's important to understand this idea because when we look today at a prehistoric bone needle, an ancient hearth, or a mammoth bone shelter behind the glass of a museum, we're not really just looking at an old object. We are seeing the result of thousands of small decisions that someone at some point made under very difficult circumstances. Many Ice Age animals were stronger than humans, their bodies better suited to the cold climate, and they had physical advantages that humans never possessed. Yet most of those species today exist only as fossils, while humans live in every environment, from the Arctic ice to the Sahara Desert. For this reason, many anthropologists say that understanding human evolution solely in terms of the body will always be insufficient. Our greatest adaptation may never have been muscles. The real advantage was that what a person learned did not end with their death. That knowledge passed on to others, and their observations then added to it. so that each generation began its journey from a slightly better position than the last. Evolution wasn't happening only in genes, it was happening in ideas as well. When we look back to ancient winters, we don't just see snow, cold, and survival. We see that aspect of human nature which, time and again, turned seemingly impossible environments into opportunities for learning. Because thousands of years ago, our ancestors learned one thing that hasn't changed to this day. The greatest strength of humans isn't their bodies, but their ability to learn, adapt, and pass their knowledge on to future generations.